Today's daf is Chulin daf Lamed Gimel, and we will begin 12 lines from the bottom of daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis, a very, very important Gemara as it relates to the core sugyas of Masechtas Chulin and a really festive daf. Guf. Reb Shimon ben Lakish said, Shachat es hakana, if the shoichet shechted the kana, the trachea, meaning one of the two simanim of a behemoth, va'achar kach nikva hareya, and afterwards the lungs of the animal got a nekev that should technically render the animal a treifa. So Rish Lakish said a chiddush. The Gemara discussed it on the top of the Yomit Kshera. The halacha is that the behema is going to be kosher, and although technically a nekev in the reya should make the animal treifa, being that it happened after the shechita of the kana, the animal's not going to be a treifa. Rava said, Reb Shimon ben Lakish ela b'reya. When Rish Lakish said his halacha, he meant dafka the reya, meaning he didn't just say nikva hareya as an example of a treifa, but rather he meant dafka that example. And the reason is because the trachea is attached to the lungs. And it's for that reason in halacha we look at the kana and the reya as being one aver. Being that we look at them as being one aver, and the sheichet already shechted the kana, he technically killed that aver. So if he killed that aver, the fact that that aver now got a mortal wound doesn't bother me. Meaning, that's pashit, said Rava, that if an animal would become a treifa in between the shchita of the kana and the veshet, then the animal would be a treifa. And you would not be able to shecht the second siman in a kosher way so that the animal wouldn't be an avela anymore. The reason that this is not an issue is because the reya is attached to the kana, and the shchita already took place in the kana, which means the kana and the reya are technically already dead. If that's the case, it doesn't bother me that the reya has a treifa. The Lashon HaGemara on the top of the Yomid was, and this is a very important Lashon HaGemara, is it's keman de mancha b'dikula damya. Once you shech the reya, we look at the reya and everything that's attached to it as if it's sitting on a basket. It's not in the animal. And just like if an aver was in the basket, any nekev that it would get would not render it a treifa. It's for that reason it wouldn't be a treifa either. Says the Gemara, but let's say the bnei meyayin, the intestines of the animal, would get a nekev or some other part of the animal. Over there, the halacha would be that its pashut would be a treifa. Maskef Reb Zera asked on Rav, he says, I don't understand. If you're telling me that an animal that gets a simin of a treifa in between the shchita of the kana and the veshet is not a problem when it happens in the reya, mali bereya, mali b'bnei meyayim, I don't hear the chilik. In other words, Reb Zera argued fundamentally with Rav's understanding of Rish Lakish, whereas Rav said that Rish Lakish's case was where nikva hareya between the shchita of the kana and the veshet, dafka the reya, because the reya is attached to the kana. Once you shech the kana, I don't care what happens to the reya anymore. The reason is because the kana and the reya are commanded mancha b'dikula damya. It's as if they're not even in the animal anymore. So it's pashut that it would have rendered a treifa. But Reb Zera said, I disagree. I don't think it's a svara dafka in the reya. But I think Rish Lakish said it with regards to any aver, even the bnei meyayim, which are not attached to the kana. The bnei meyayim are attached to the veshet. But even the bnei meyayim, if it would get a nekev after the shchita of the reya, it wouldn't be a treifa. And the reason is, like Rashi explains, because Reb Zera said that I think what Rish Lakish is saying is that an animal, once you shecht one of the simanim, can't become a treifa anymore. It's not dafka the reya because it's attached to the kana, which is punk the siman that you attach. But there's a halacha that an animal could be a treifa if you didn't start the shchita. But once you start the shchita, even if you shechted one siman, nothing to do with yeshla shchita b'tchila v'atzayif or einel shchita el b'tzayif. The point is that once you started the shchita, there's only a chatzi chiyus remaining in the animal, says Rashi. At that point, there's no way for an animal to be a treifa. Says the Gemara that even though Reb Zera was maskefla, he came very, very self-confidently. He asked very strongly on Rava, but the Gemara says, Reb Zera. Later, Reb Zera was chayz. How do you know? The by Reb Zera cleared a shayla, nikvu b'nei meyayim in simon l'simon ma. What happens if the sheichet shechted the kana, and then after the shechita of the kana, the b'nei meyayim got a nekev that should technically make the animal a treifa. And then he went and he shechted the veshet. Reb Zera wasn't sure. Mi mitzvah of siman rishon with siman sheni v'tar b'dei nevelo. Do we say that at the end of the day the sheichet shechted both simanim so that this animal will not have tumas nevela? Or do we not say that, and we say that the animal will have tumas nevela? Now, it's clear, says Rashi, from Reb Zera Shaila, that Reb Zera was never proposing that you should be able to eat this animal. The reason is because at the end of the day, it's a treifa. His Shaila only was, could you be mitzdarif to two shchitos, the shchita of the Siman Rishon and the shchita of the Siman Sheni, to say that although you can't eat it because it's a treifa, but at the very least it shouldn't be an avela, so it shouldn't be tummy. But what's the difference between a treifa and avela? You can't eat a treifa, you can't eat an avela. They're both alav sheish by ma'isa. They both involve malchus. What's the difference between a treifa and a vela? The difference is tumah. A treifa has a kosher shchita. Being that it has a kosher shchita, there's no tumas nevela. A nevela never had a kosher shchita. As a result, there's always going to be tumas nevela. So Reb Zera Shaila was in this case where nikfu bnei me'ayim bein simin l'simin. Do you say that at the very least there's a shchita to say that it's not a nevela so that there won't be tumas nevela? Or no, you can't eat it and it's not even tumas. Now what's the shaila? So Rashi explains the shaila was as follows. The shaila was that maybe the only time you can mitzdarif the two simanim is if the two simanim were doing the same thing. In this case, the two simanim were not doing the same thing. The first siman, its shchita took place before nikfa b'nei me'ayim, which means that shchita was able to be mitaher the animal midei tumas nevela and also be materit la'achila. The second siman happened after it already obtained this wound. As a result, it didn't have the ability to be materit ba'achila. All it had the ability to do was to be matarit midei nevela. So being that the shchita of the two simanim are not accomplishing the same thing, so Reb Zera was clearing a lumdis, because maybe that means that you can't even be mitzdarif the shchita of the two simanim. The Gemara said after Reb Zera declared the shayla, Vamrina, and the Olam told Reb Zera, Lav hainu de boy ilfa. Isn't this ilfa shayla? What did ilfa declare? Hoitzi uber es yadai. Bein simin l'simin. If an uber so who was Ilfa? No, stuck his hand out. No, we'll have to wait for the rain. Exactly. What happens if the Uber would stick his hand out? One word. So Ilfa Shaila really requires a little bit of background, and that is, the halacha is that if you shecht an animal, a female animal, and the animal had an Uber, the halach is the shchita of the mother works for the uber as well, stating that it only works if the uber never left the mechitzos of its mother. But let's say before the shchita, the uber stuck its hand out of the mother's guf, the halach is that would cause that the shchita wouldn't work. Now, that's only true with regards to the shchita being matter the uber la'achila. But despite the fact that the shchita does not work to be mata the uber lachila, it would work to be moitzi midei nevela. So Ilfa declared a very similar shaila to Reb Zera Shaila. Shaila was, what happens if the uber stuck its hand out being similar simin? Mina, do we say mitzdarif simin rishon l'simin sheni l'tar midei nevela? Do we say that at the very least the two simanim could be mitaher this uber midei nevela, or maybe not? And what would be the svara not? The same svara like we said before. Because the shchita is accomplishing something different with regards to the siman rishon than it is with regards to the siman sheni. The siman rishon happened before the uber stuck its hand outside of the mother. As a result, that shchita technically was able to be moitzi, the uber midei nevela was also able to be materet ba'achila. The second siman happened after it was already hoitzi uber esiyada. At that point, all it had the ability to do was to be mitayre midei nevela. So the shaylas could have been mitzvah, but either way, so they told Reb Zera, your shayla is all for shayla. But what's the bottom line? What do we need from here? What was Reb Zera shayla? If nekfa b'nei me'ayim similar simin, it's pashi now that he eat it. The shaila was, do you have tumas nevela or not? This lumdish shaila, could you be mitzdarif to two shchitas? Meaning that the two shchitas are technically not on the same level. Avo b'achila asur, but every regis is going to be also b'achila. The kash is, if Reb Zera said that when Rish Lakish said his halacha of shachat as akona v'achak nikfa reya ksher was lav dafka reya, even the bnei me'ayim, then in that case, this is a regular good shchita. The fact that it became a treifa in between the two simanim is not a problem, because at that point it only had a chatzi and ain't treifa b'chatzi chiyos, says the Gemara. The Ravina, it's not muchach that Reb Zera was chayzer from his understanding of Reish Lakish from the fact that he cleared this question, because it could be Reb Zera l'dvar the Rava kama v'leilei. It could be Reb Zera was only clearing the shayla libe the Rava, but as it relates to he himself, he never held that way. The bottom line is, Reish Lakish said a very, very important halacha. Reish Lakish's halacha was nikfa hareya, between the shchita of the kana and the shchita of the veshet, the halacha is ksheira. And we have machlokes Rava and Reb Zera, whether Rish Lakish meant dafka nikfa hareya, because the reya is attached to the kana, and once you shecht the kana, the kana and the reya are commanded mancha b'dikula damya, and as a result, any nekev that it attains can't affect the animal anymore? Or did he lav dafka mean the reya? He just mentioned the reya as an example. But even if it was the bnei meyayim, which is not attached to the kana, it's attached to the veshet, over there you would have the same halacha. It would seem to be a machlokes Rava and Rab Zer. But the Gemara continues with a very, very important halacha related to Reish Lakish. Very long the Gemara. Rav Acha bar Yaakov. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov said, Shema min Reb Shimon ben Lakish, l'chura, you could be meichiach from Reish Lakish as halacha, that mezamnin Yisrael al b'nei meyayin, ve'im mezamnin oivnei dechavim al b'nei meyayin. That if you want to invite a yid over to your house, that he should eat a meal with you, you could serve him even the b'nei meyayim of the animal. But you can never invite an oived kechavim to your house, have dinner with you, and serve him the b'nei meyayim. My time. What's the reason? You saw the b'shchita talyum milsa. A yid is allowed to eat an animal as soon as it has a kosher shchita. As given the ikar shchita mal yisa, that everything in the animal is mutter to be eaten. But a guy, a guy doesn't need shchita in order for him to be able to eat food. A guy has the sheva mitzvah, one of which is eva menachai, which means he's not allowed to eat a live animal. He can't even eat an aver that came off of a live animal, even if later the animal died. It doesn't matter. Any aver that departed from an animal while it was alive is a problem. But in order for there not to be an Isra Eva Menachai, all you need is Nechira. You just need that the animal should be dead. It has nothing to do with Shchita. If that's the case, Ubemisa Talia Milsa, the guy needs the animal to be dead when the aver of the animal departs from the animal. The Bnei Me'ayim are always going to be considered Eva Menachai. What's the reason? The reason is very simple. Because the definition of Shchita is Shchita's base simanim. The simanim are the kana and the veshet, the trachea and the esophagus, respectively. The Metziah says that after the shoichet shechts, the two simanim, the animal's still alive. It's what we know as mifarcheses. It's a very short period of time. It's a few seconds. But for a few seconds after the shchita of the kana and the veshet, the animal's still alive. Listen to the lumdus of the Gemara. If Reish Lakish said that as soon as you shech the kana, the reya, which is attached to the kana, is command the mancha b'dikula damya. It's as if it's not part of the animal anymore. So much so that if it gets a nekev, it wouldn't make the animal puzzle. The same should be true with the bnei meyayim after you shech the veshet. The bnei meyayim should be command the mancha b'dikula damya. It should not be part of the animal anymore. That means every single time a shoichet shechts, he shechts the kana, then he shechts the veshet. So anything attached to the kana and the veshet is not part of the animal. The animal's still alive. It's still mefarcheses for 3 seconds, whatever. But the animal's still alive, and at that point, those evarim are not part of the animal. You know what a chelik of an animal that leaves the animal while the animal is alive is called? It's called Eva Menachat. Now, for a yid, it's not an issue. Because although it's true, technically, from a lumdis, from a halachic standpoint, the Evarim, Eva Menachat, this is so geschmack. But at the same time, he did a shchita. And by a yid, b'shchita tal yirachmana. But a guy has nothing to do with shchita. When you look at a guy, could a guy eat this or not eat this? Very simple. Is the animal alive or is the animal dead? So if you do a kosher shchita, you do shchitas based simanim, it's very nice you have a kosher shchita, mahadrim and a mahadrim. But being that the animal's still alive, a guy's still not allowed to eat from it. If that's the case, the rei, the bnei miyayim, all these things that are attached to these evarim, if they breathe, these things left the animal while the animal was still alive, l'chura said Rav Acha bar Yaakov a chiddush noira, ein mezamnim oivdei kechavim al bnei miyayim, but mezamnim Yisrael al bnei miyayim. In other words, it's going to come out that a yid is allowed to eat the bnei miyayim of an animal that had a kosher shchita, but a guy is not allowed to eat the bnei miyayim of an animal that had a kosher shchita. Amar Rav Papa said a little bit of drama. I was sitting in shit when Rav Acha bar Yaakov said this. And I was dying to ask the following question. He said, how's this possible? No such thing. How could it be that the Bnei Miyayim is mutter to a yid and it's usher to a guy? He didn't ask the kasha. And I assumed the timer kamar because Mr. Rav Acha bar Yaakov he said a timer kamar. But says the Gemara is stating that Tanya the late Rav Acha bar Yaakov, that Rav Papa really should have asked the question, because as we're going to see now, we have a mefurish brayso and al right. So if somebody wants to eat from an animal and he wants to eat it before the animal actually dies, we'll see in a moment that apparently it was considered healthy to eat the meat that departed for an animal while it was alive. Problem is, it's Eva Menachai. But if somebody wants to do it, there's a way to do it. You take off a little bit of basar from the Beis HaShchita. It's just practically, it's easier to do it from the Beis HaShchita. You have to do a melicha, obviously. You have to wash it, obviously. And you wait for the animal to die. And the Brisa says, a yid's allowed to do it and a guy's allowed to do it. Now, a yid's allowed to do it, we understand. Because once it has a kosher shchita, even if it's still alive, it's mefarcheses. says, but b'shchita tal yirachmana. But why is a guy allowed to do it? L'chura by a guy b'nechira tal yirachmana. So if it's totally in nechira, it should not be okay. The reason is like Rav Papa wanted to ask, because mi ikon midi de Yisrael shari levi kechav maser. At the end of the day, if it's mutter for a yid, it has to be mutter to a guy. The Gemara says Messiah le Rabbi Bar Abin, Rabbi Bar Abin, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ashken, or Itz Sheyavri. Somebody wants to be healthy. Choytach kezayis pasa mi veish chitash behema. He should cut off a kezayis pasa from an animal while it's alive. Umocha yafa yafa, umadicha yafa yafa, umam tlat shetetz in nafsha. Echad ovek kechavim, echad Yisrael mutarim. But again, Yisrael we understand. But why a guy? Isn't that Evim and Achai 101? The answer is yes. But at the same time, there's a rule. Mi ikumidi dili Yisrael shari ula oived koichavim aser. So the Gemara comes out with a machloikis, Rav Acher bar Yaakov and other Amayron. At the end of the day, the Gemara seems to bring a brisa that resolved this dispute, and that is that even though in Svara the Gemara wanted to argue that it would make sense that Ein Mezamnin Oived Kechavim Al Bnei Me'ayim, and the reason is based on Rish Lakish's lumdus that as soon as you shech the kana and the veshet, anything attached to the kana and the veshet is commanded mancha b'dikula damya, even though the animal is still alive, it l'chura then by definition means that it's evim and achai, but being that it's mutal Yisrael, because for Yisrael, the definition of whether something's evim and achai or not depends on shchita, just like a ben pekua, Yisrael's allowed to eat it, but Noach's not allowed to eat. Why? Because ben pekua had the shchita of the mother. The point is, b'shchita tayi rachmana, so that even though technically for the goy it should not be okay, but based on mi'ik immediately Yisrael, shari, like kechav maser, it would be okay, and that seems to be the maskana sagamar, stating that the achroinim, and it's the Pischei Tshuva brings the Achroinim in Hilchos Shchita in Simin Chav Zayin, the Tfuashar and others say, what would be if a Shoichet was doing Shchita and it was a Shchita Psula? So for example, he messed up, there was Shia, there was Chalada, there was Drasa, he did a Shchita Psula. He shechted the two simanim. That's how he killed the animal. But the shchita was not a kosher shchita. And being that it's not a kosher shchita, it's going to be an avela. Say the achroinin, it should come out that in that case, you would not be allowed to give the bnei me'ayim to a guy. Why not? Because really, the guy is not allowed to eat the bnei me'ayim. The reason is because it's evim and achai. Because as soon as you shecht the kana and the veshet, we look at the bnei me'ayin as if they command the mancha b'dekuladan. The problem is the animal's still alive for a few seconds. If that's the case, it's as if you remove the aver from the animal while it was alive, so that even if the animal dies later, it's going to be evim and achai. Now the Gemara said that it is okay. Rav Acher bar Yaakov said it wasn't okay, but Rav Papa said he wanted to ask the question, and we had a brisa, and we had a misayeli. The Gemara came out that a guy is not allowed to eat it. That guy can't eat it. Why could the guy eat it? Because being that the yid's allowed to eat it, because for a yid it's totally in shchita, immediately Yisrael shari ula over kechav masa. But that say the achroid and the tfuah shar and others, that's only going to be true if at the end of the day the yid's allowed to eat it. But what happens if the yid can't eat it anyways? The reason the yid can't eat it because there was a shia, because there was a chalada, because there was something wrong with the shchita. If that's the case, it's hadar dina that it's going to be aser to a guy. And it's based on this shita sachroin. Not everybody agrees, the Pichadash argues, but based on this shita sachroinim, it's the shita of the Tashbitz, of the Pritoyar, of the Tfuashar, and other achroinim. Based on that, the Shoyal in Shilas Teshuvas Chassam Sofer, it's in Yoyer Day Simin Yotest. He told his Rebbe, he sent the Shiloh, it's a Talmud of the Chassam Sofer. He said, Rebbe, I have a big problem. Because what do the Schlachthäuses do? What do the slaughterhouses do when they have Nevelos and Treifas? They sell everything to a guy. So he says, I don't understand. How you let us sell to a guy? It's true, Nevel and Treifas mutabah, but you have a different problem over here. The problem is, what happens with an animal that was nisnavla at the time of the shchita? You're going to sell the entire animal to the guy. The guy is going to eat the animal. Every part of it, even the bnei me'ayim. The problem is, the bnei me'ayim is evim and achai. It's evim and achai because of Reish Lakish's lumdis, and being that even a yid's not allowed to eat it, you don't have the miyik immediately Yisrael shari uloivik kechav maser. So he says a very big problem. So he came up with an eight. He wrote a whole kuntras to the Talmud of the Chassam Sofer, and he wanted askama from his Rebbe on his kuntras to. It's called Mechiras B'nei Me'ayil of Ne'noyach. It basically worked like a shtar mechira. You sell it to a non-Jewish employee, and that he had some sort of eitzah how this was all going to work. The Maisa, the Chassam Sofer, wrote back to his Talmud that number one, I disagree with your eitzah. I think that your eitz is causing more problems than it's actually solving. And then he spoke to him about, in general, doing things differently than we have in Messiah. And the Chassam Sofer says what he said all the time, V'chol mili tuva ein l'mayr l'chadish iser u'mikol shkein heter ki minig Yisrael toirahi v'aklal ha'chadash asim and ha'toira b'chol makom. Chassam Sofer always said this, v'hayashan u'miyushin meshubach mimenu. So I would rather do things the way we've always done it and figure out why it's right, rather than come up with chadash, something that no one's ever heard of. So the question is, it's a very good question though. At the end of the day, how are you going to explain this? Said the Chassam Sofer that the pshat is as follows. He says the emes is, he says he's had conversations with sheikhtim, and he says ruba de ruba of nevelas and treifas that are found in shlachthäusers are really only Suffolk nevela and Suffolk treifa. He said it's a fact. It's very hard to find a real nevela. He says usually it's all based on a Suffolk, and we're very machmir because it's Suffolk dairaisa when it comes to machalas hasurais, and as a result, anytime there's a little bit of shaila, we get rid of it. Now Suffolk nevela, you have to go to chumrah. Why? So we already had the Gemara a few times in Masechtas Chulin, but it's something that everybody knows. The reason is because the behemoth is becheskas isser. I meant this. Every animal is becheskas isser. Now, if you ask the man on the street, why is an animal becheskas isser? Right? If you have a shaila now if the shechita was kosher or not, it's a suffix. I don't know. What do you do with a suffix? If you don't know what to do, it's a suffix dairaisa l'chumra. But maybe you do know what to do. Chazal karayv, right? Let's sit down and try to figure out. Maybe there's a way to be machriya the suffix. So the first thing you're going to say is cheskas isser. Chulin daf tesam and alav. You're going to tell me cheskas isser. What's the cheskas isser? Evim and achai, right? When the animal was alive, it was also b'achila. But the truth is, it's not so pashut. It's a gemara in the end of Masechtas Chulin, and Taisus in many places in Shas, Zocht Chassam Sofer is machriya that it's a dover pashut that an animal does not have a cheskas isser of evim and achai. And the reason is because when an animal is alive, it's not a medas lachila. The only time it would have a cheskas isser, if you have a piece of meat that's sitting on a plate and it's b'cheskas isser, that would be a chazaka. But a live animal doesn't have a cheskas isser of achila because it's not a medis la'achila, and it's based on a sugi in the end of Masechtas Chulin. So Tosfos said throughout Shas that the Gemara says that an animal has a cheskas isser, it's a different chazaka. It's the chazaka of enoi zavuach. That's what it's known as in yeshiva. Cheskas ein zavuach. And cheskas ein zavuach is because in order to eat from an animal, you need a shchita. And an animal's becheskas that it didn't have a kosher shchita. So the reason every time there's a suffix shchita, the animal is asa b'achil, it's not because of the cheskas evim and achai. It's because it's becheskas that it didn't have a good shchita. Hagufa. It's what's known as cheskas ein zavuach. Says the Chassam Sofer, cheskas ein zavuach is a chazaka when we're dealing with a yid. Because a yid has a mitzvah shchita that he needs to accomplish before he's able to eat a piece of meat. But a benayach doesn't have shchita. For a benayach, all you need is that the animal should not be alive. If all you need is that the animal should not be alive, if you have a dead animal in front of you, it doesn't have a cheskas isser, it has a cheskas heter. Right? When the animal's alive, there was no chazaka. When does the chazaka come into effect? It's a very simple this. When the animal dies. So if it's a yid, so you have to know, was the animal zavuach or not? It's becheskas that it wasn't zavuach. It wasn't zavuach when it was born. So when did the zvicha go into effect? So it's becheskas ein zavuach. As a result, every time you have a sofik nevela, you have to go to chumrah. But a guy doesn't need zvicha. All you need to know with a guy is that it's dead. It's dead. It's a piece of flesh right now. So obviously it's not alive. There's no cheskas ein zavuach. As a result, when it comes to a guy, every time you have a sofik, you're going to be able to go lekula. So said the Chassam Sofer Davar Nifli, he said most nevelas are anyways only sofik nevela. If that's the case, it's true for a year to sofik nevela. You have to get rid of it. Why do you have to get rid of it? Because you have a cheskas ein zavuach. You're not allowed to eat it. But for the ben noyach, it's not a problem. And being that it's not a problem for the ben noyach, it's going to be okay. So he says, at the end of the day, all it is a suffix. And being that all it is a suffix, you're allowed to give it to the guy. The reason you're allowed to give it to the guy because the guy is allowed to eat suffix nevela. Then the Chassam Sofer continues, and he says that the emes is, I'll tell you another svara. And he makes a beautiful diak. He says, when the Gemara said that you're not allowed to give the bnei me'ayim to a guy, so what was the Lashon HaGemara? The Lashon HaGemara was, Ein mezamnim oivdei kechavim al bnei me'ayim. Ein mezamnim is not allowed to invite an Ein Yehudi to your house and serve him the bnei me'ayim. Why the Lashon HaGemara of Ein mezamnim? Why does it say simple? You're not allowed to give him. Right? The Gemara says you're not allowed to be Moshe to kois yayin l'nazir. You're not allowed to hand Evim and Achai to a guy. So what's this Lashon of Ein mezamnim? So he says that the pshat is as follows. He says that the Tosfos in Masechtas Gittin daf Samach Aleph Amud Aleph, and he says Tosfos in Masechtas Avodah Zarah daf Tes Vav Amud Aleph say a very, very important yesod in the laws of Lifnei Iver Loisitei Michshol. And that is the only time there's a problem with Lifnei Iver Loisitei Michshol is if you know for sure that the person's going to do an avera. But any svara that you can ever be toiler lahakel when it comes to Lifnei Iver, you're allowed to be toiler. It's a very big chiddush. Let's speak out one of the makayres, and that is there's a Mishnah Masechtas Gittin daf Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. The Mishnah says, "Mashelas isha lechavirta hachashuda ala shvius nafa v'kivra rechai v'tana." What happens if there's two ladies, they're neighbors, and one of them is chashud on shvius? It happens to be shvius. She gets a knock on the door. My mother wants to know if she could borrow a pot. Your mother wants to borrow a pot. What's she going to use it for? For shvius pay rice? So l'chura you would think you're not allowed to lend it to her. You're going to be over lifnei iver loisitei michshol. Says the Mishnah, it's okay. And the reason it's okay is mipnei darkei shalom. Meaning, if not for darkei shalom, it'd really be a problem. But Chum said a chiddush mipnei darkei shalom. Even though there's an issa shvius going on over here, we allow you to do it. Tosfos asks a kasha that there's a Mishnah Masechtas Shvius that says Beis Hillel says you're allowed to sell a para to a person that's chashud ala shvius. Machlokes b'sham Beis Hillel. B'sham says you're not allowed to because you're afraid that the person who's chashud ala shvius is going to use the parah to do work in the field. B'charish v'katzah tishbais. You're not allowed to do work on the field on shvius. But Beis Hillel says it's okay. Why is it okay? Because we could assume that maybe the person is using the para to shecht and to eat, not to work in the field. It's a freight akasha. If that's the case, you see you're allowed to make assumptions when it comes to lifnei iver, specifically with regards to chashad ala shvius. So why in our Mishnah do we have to come out to darkei shalom? Beis Hillel shita is that you're always allowed to make assumptions. So why can't we make an assumption over here? That's this kasha. V'imra Rabbeinu Tam, the obvious answer. You know why in our Mishnah we had to come out to darkei shalom? Because there were no assumptions to make. There's absolutely positively no assumption to make. And as a result, the only svara that says that you're allowed to give these kalim to a woman that's chasha ala shvius on shvius, ayo over lifnei iver, it's because of a new chiddush mipnei darkei shalom. But enochinami, to the extent that you can make an assumption, it doesn't matter what the assumption is, as Tosfos, you always have a right to make assumptions. And it doesn't matter how far-fetched it may seem. And says the Chassam Sofer, this is an important yesod in Lifnei Iver Loisitei Michshol. Even though Tosfos doesn't speak it out as if it's important yesod in Lifnei Iver, but it is, says the Chassam Sofer. What Tosfos is essentially saying, that when it comes to Lifnei Iver, you're allowed to be toigel lahakil. And any svara that you can come up with, maybe this person is not going to be doing an avera, you have a right to make such an assumption and assume that the person is not going to do it. He has another Tosfos in Avodah Zarah, but the bottom line is to the extent that there's any svara to be toila, that my act of lifnei iver is not really lifnei iver, you have a right to do that. Based on that, says the Chassam Sofer, I'm going to tell you two Gemaras. This Gemara Masechtas Nedarim Daf Nun Daled Amud Beis. V'chein Hoyer Rab Shimon Gamliel Loimer Kirvayim, the intestines of an animal, lav basar. It's not meat. V'oichleim, and someone that eats it, lav bar inish. That's nicht kein Mensch. Human beings do not eat. Incidentally, you know what the kirvayim of an animal is? I think it's the Israeli kishka, but I'm serious. But either way, Amru Chazal, there's another Gemara. Shabbos Kuf Mem Beis Amud Beis. Tavi bar avza, a person should roast the bar avza. V'shadi b'nei me'ayim l'shunra, but take the take the b'nei me'ayim and give it to the shunra, right? Don't eat it. So two Gemaras that people Pashat mentioned did not eat the b'nei me'ayim. So it says the Chassam Sofer, what are you worried about? You worried that the guy is going to eat the b'nei me'ayim? I'm not worried, because there's a Gemara in the Dorim and Dalin Amud Beis that people don't eat the b'nei me'ayim, and it's a Gemara that you're supposed to give it to the shunra. If that's the case, it's enough of a svara that you could be toivel lahakal. He says that's the diak in the Gemara. The Gemara said ein mezamnin. You're allowed to give it to a guy. You know why you're allowed to give it to a guy? The same way you're allowed to sell a para to someone that's chashan at shvius on shmita, because you don't assume he's going to use it for shmita. What do you mean he's going to? No, you don't have to make the assumption. Here too, you don't assume he's going to eat it. Why don't you assume he's going to eat it based on the Gemara in the Dara, based on the Gemara over here? Half of a fella, right? But as it relates to what's it called, either way, that was the Chassam Sofer. Two mahalchim to answer this kasha. He told the Talmud we don't need the contrast, but he said two mahalchim why it's okay. Number one, because right nevelas are anyway suffix, so it's true for us. We have the cheskas ein zavuch. It's going to be a problem. But as it relates to the Ben Noach who doesn't have the cheskas ein zavuch, what you're left with is a suffix. You're left with a suffix. For him, it's going to be okay. Number two, being that when it comes to Lifnei Iver, you're allowed to be toiler in any kula, any svara lahakal, you have a right to be toiler. Over here, we can be toiler lahakal, and it's based on that. Said the Chassam Sofer, it's going to be okay. Incidentally, at the end of this tshuva, there's a second part to this tshuva. So the Chassam Sofer told this Talmud that I'm going to attach to you a shtickle Torah that I wrote on this Inyan, that I wrote when I was younger. In the new Chassam Sofers, Not the ones printed in 1871, but in the new Chassam Soifers, so on the bottom they bring an extended version of what the Chassam Soifer told his Talmud when he attached this. So he writes like this: V'gam atik l'cha mashe kosafti b'mei churfi binyanim elu. Hagam ki dekatnusehi. Amazing. This is what Chassam Soifer is writing. It's a dava katan. Ulai timatze by dava taif. Maybe you'll find something there, a little raid. Aval ein lismach al advar mehem ladina. But he says, don't rely on that ladin. Ki kosafti b'yaldus. Because I wrote it when I was younger. So he says, I don't want you to rely on this halacha. I just thought it was interesting because the Welt says over that the Ramshik used to say about the Chassam Sofer that if you look at the tshuvas that he wrote when he was younger and you look at the tshuvas that he wrote when he was older, it's impossible to know which one he wrote when he was, which is very, very rare. Chassam Sofer wrote tshuvas over a 40, 50 year period. And he said it's impossible to differentiate. Usually you would think with time, style, which there would be natural things that would impact the tshuva, right? But the Chassam Sofer said his tshuvas were literally the same, toichen kebaron, from the beginning to the end. And he said, I think, metaphorically, he said that because the tshuvas of the Chassam Sofer were halachos l'Moshe, pun intended, misinai, and he said they were written Baruch HaKodesh, and written Baruch HaKodesh, so there was no wear and tear. You didn't have the natural causes and effects that would affect a regular person. And he said the tshuvas that the Chassam Sofer when he was young and older, it's all the same. Here the Chassam Sofer himself writes to his Talmud, he says, I don't want you to rely on this that I'm writing in my tshuva because I wrote it when I was younger, but either way, that concludes the first dara. Let's finish the daf, and then if we have some time, we'll speak out the second dara. Either way, so the Gemara now is going to turn its attention really for the next 3 dafin, and it's going to discuss the laws of Tumah v'Tahira. So just a little bit of background. So we're all familiar with the basic concept of Tumah. Today we don't really live with the laws of Tumah v'Tahira, Tumah Snida, but there's not a lot of Tumah v'Tahira that we live with today on a Kohen's not to be Matam L'meis, but very, very, very. But once upon a time, Tumah v'Tahira took up a very, very important part of the daily life of a Yid. And we know that there are different sources of Tumah. A mace is a source of Tumah. You have the Shmoyne Shrotzim. We're learning Masechtas Chulin, which deals a lot about the Nevela. The Nevela of a Behema, the Nevela of an Oif, different types of Tumah. You have a Zav, you have a Zava, you have a Nida, you have a Mitzayra. Most things that are Tameh are known in Tumah v'Tahira terminology as an Avatumah. Av in the sense that it's a source of Tumah. A mace is an Avi. Avaysa Tumah, we're not going to be discussing Tumah's mace. Most sources of Tumah is called an Av HaTumah. If an Av HaTumah is mitama, something comes into contact with something, that thing that it came into contact with now becomes Tameh, right? You touch someone that's Tameh, you become Tameh. It's like it's viral. That's Tumah spreads. So if someone touches something that's Tameh, it too becomes Tameh. Stating that, it loses a certain level, qualitatively, of the Tumah that it now has. So if something became Tameh because it came into contact with something else that's Tameh, so from a big picture, both things are Tameh. But from an Echos perspective, they're not Tameh on the same level. There's an Echos Darga. Although the thing is Tameh, but it's on a lesser extent. It's what's known as a Rishon L'Tumah. If a Rishon L'Tumah touches something else, that thing will be Tameh, but it too is going to be on a low madrega. It's going to be a Sheni L'Tumah. If a Sheni L'Tumah touches something, that thing will be Tameh. A Shlishi L'Tumah. If a Shlishi L'Tumah touches something, that too will become Tameh. It's what's known as a Revi L'Tumah. Now just a few very important halachas. Number 1, Chulin can never become a Shlishi L'Tumah. That means the highest level of Tumah, or the lowest level of Tumah, that Chulin can ever attain is a Sheni L'Tumah. So a Rishon touches Chulin, given certain parameters, Chulin could become a Sheni L'Tumah. But if a Sheni L'Tumah of Chulin, let's say, will now touch another piece of Chulin, that thing will not become Tameh. It stops there. Chulin can never become a Shlishi L'Tumah. Truma could become a Shlishi L'Tumah. Truma, however, can't become a Revi L'Tumah. So you can never have a Revi L'Tumah that's going to be Truma. Kachim could become even a Revi L'Tumah. So you have Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi, Revi. The highest level of Tumah that Chulin can have is Sheni, meaning you'll never have Chulin that's a Shlishi L'Tumah. Chulin that's a Sheni, or Truma that's a Sheni, or Kachim that's a Sheni, can make Truma or Kachim into a Shlishi. It can't make Chulin into a Shlishi. Truma is the highest level of Shlishi. a shlishi could not make chulin or truma into a revi. It could, however, make kachim into a revi. I hope that made sense. Either way, it's like the Mishnah. If somebody shechts a behema or a chaya or a knife, these things are all important. And he did a very clean job. No blood came out of the animal. The halach is ksherim. The shchita is kosher. It seems like there would have been a havamina that if no dam came out of the animal, maybe that should be a reason in and of itself that the shchita should be possible. Says the Mishnah, no, it's going to be kosher. Additionally, a very big chiddush. You're going to be allowed to eat the meat of this animal. You can take the meat out and you can eat it even if your hands are tameh. And the reason is because we know that in order for food to become tameh, it first has to be huchsha l'kabel toma, which means it has to become wet with some mashka. If it doesn't become wet, you can touch it with hands that are tummy from today till tomorrow. It in and of itself won't be, even if a sheretz falls on it, it won't be tummy. So we're discussing someone that's a sheichet, he's shechting, and his hands are tummy. The question is, could he take a piece of meat out now? Could he eat it? So the halacha is that usually no, because usually the basar is automatically going to become huchshel l'kabel tuma, because the bloody situation, the blood that came out of the animal, is going to cause the basar to become now huchshel l'kabel tuma. So if your hands are tummy, you're now going to be matam the basar. But in the event that you were able to shech the behemah chayva oif, v'lo yotze mehem dam, so not only is it kosher shchita, but you have a fringe benefit, and that is nacholim biyadayim mesuah voice. And the reason is l'fishlei huchshu Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says huchshu b'shchita. We're going to see Reb Shimon in a few days. Sok the Gemara, time of yotze mehem dam. From the Gemara, it's mashma that the only reason it's okay to eat this basar with tummy hands is because hacha b'maya skina, where there was no dam, so the basar never became huchshel l'kabel tuma. Hayotze mehem dam. And if dam would come out, then you wouldn't be allowed to. Why not? Very simple. Because the dam is machshir the basar l'kabel toma, and as a result, your hands, which are tamei, were now matame the hands. So therefore, if you had your dayim mesuavois, if you had tamei hands, your hands are going to be matame the basar. Freak the Gemara, Rabbi, Tyrus 101, your dayim shniyos. Anytime we're discussing hands that are tamei, meaning hands in contrast to the rest of the body, the hands are by definition a sheni l'tomah. We'll see on Amid Beis, the Gemara is going to have a hechitimtza where it's possible to have yodayim that are really a rishon l'tomah. But for now, the Gemara assumes, which is for sure the pashtus, that yodayim are always shnius l'tomah. If that's the case, the hands that are a sheni l'tomah can anyways not make this behema tomeh. You know why? Because ve'en sheni yoysa shlishi b'chulin. Because we said earlier, chulin can never become a shlishi l'tomah. Truma could be a shlishi l'tomah. Kachim could be a shlishi. Kachim could even be a reveal l'tomah. But chulin can never be a shlishi l'tomah. If that's the case, we're dealing with shchitas chulin over here, right? So if that's the case, what's the issue anyways? The sheichet shechted with hands that are tamei, you worry that he should be able to eat the meat because his hands that are tamei are going to be the tamei the basar of the animal. No, they're not, because the basar of the animal is chulin. We're learning mesachtas chulin, we're learning chulin. So we're dealing with chulin l'chayra. So if we're dealing with chulin, your daim that are sheni anyways can't be matameh because sheni is not oiser shlishi l'chulin. Says the Gemara, "Mimayda b'chulin askina." How do you know we're talking about chulin? Says maybe we're talking about kachim. I mean, even though we're learning mesachtas chulin, but no. Maybe we're dealing with kachim, and the Gemara is going to give 4 reasons, geshmak, how we know that we're learning chulin now and we're not learning kachim. Number 1, the ktani chaya. The Mishnah says that sheichet behema chaya v'oif. Dilu kachim chay bekachim yika. No such thing as chaya bekachim. V'su ibe kachim ki lo yatzav v'dem dam ksher. Is it possible for the Mishnah to make a statement and say that you shechted kachim, you're shechting an oil, there was no dam? No worries, it's kosher. What do you mean? Who adds me the dam utzarich? The whole tachlis of a carbon oil, all kosher. What's the ikar? This rika. The ikar is the dam. You need kabbalah, you need halacha, you need rika. So obviously it can't be kosher without dam. V'su, a third right, ibe kachim geltam dam machsher. By kachim, dam kachim is not machsher. It's a special chiddush. There's exeris hakasav. Even though mashkim are machsher, oichel to be mekabel tuma, but dam kachim is not. It's learned out from Rabbi Chibarab and Rabbi Yochanan. Dam kachim sheni machsher shenema ala oret tishbechenu kamay. And we learn from there dam shen nishbach kamay machsher. Dam that you're let us pour on the floor, that has an ability to be machshel l'kabel tuma. She'inu nishbach kamayim, but dam that's not nishbach kamayim, any machshel. V'su, and a fourth kasha, if we're dealing with kachim, kili yotzim hem dam loy miskashri, this gribish chivas hakodesh. And the fourth question, if we're dealing with kachim, you don't even need it to be huchshel l'kabel tuma. The kaimela, because we know this rule, chivas hakodesh machshartam. Kachim wakes up in the morning, muchshel l'kabel tuma. Kachim doesn't need anything to be machsharit l'kabel tuma. And if that's the case, Zok the Gemara, 4 rayas from the Mishnah that the Mishnah is dealing not with shchitas kachim, but with shchitas chulin. Number one, the Mishnah mentions a chaya. There's no shchitas chaya in kachim. Number two, the Mishnah says that it could be kosher even if there's no dam. Kachim, all you need is the dam. Dam is the one thing that's ma'akiv. Number three, the Mishnah says that the dam would be machshir. Dam kachim is not machshir. And number four, the Mishnah says you need dam to be machshir. Kachim doesn't need anything to be machshir l'kabel tumah. Chibas HaKodesh is machsharten. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Ravu. So Rav Nachman said the name Rabbi Ravu. Hacha, you have to say that the Mishnah is talking about bechulin. We're talking about a behemoth that was once chulin. Shalacham kesef meiser. You bought it with meiser sheni money. So somebody had meiser sheni, he was paid it. Now he has money, goes up to Yerushalayim, and he takes his meiser sheni money and he buys a behemoth. This is the behemoth that the person shechting right now. Udulay Kurameir. And the Mishnah is like Kurameir. How we learn to the Mishnah? Call hatotin bi asmayim edivei soifrim. Anything that requires tefillah, tahira midrabanan, metamas hakodesh is a sheni l'toma. And being that it's a sheni l'toma, it's metamas hakodesh. What does that mean? Metama, when you're dealing with toma v'tahira, it means it makes kachim tameh in a way that it could be metama. That's what yitama means. Because the kachim becomes a shlishi, and it could make more kachim or revi, upaisel as a truma. But it's only paisel truma. Because although it could be metama truma, but it can't make the truma tameh that it should be able to be metama more truma. Now the truth is, it's a little misleading, because the truma could be metama kachim. It's paisel as a truma in the truma sense. But the bottom line is, something that's a sheni l'tuma does not have an ability to be metama chulin. It doesn't have an ability to be metama meiser sheni. Divrei Rameir. V'chachamim oisrim b'meiser. The chachamim say no, that when it comes to meiser, it's going to be aser, which the Gemara assumes now means it could be metama meiser sheni. What's the bottom line? What do you see from me? You see machlekes remain the chachamim whether a sheni l'tuma could be metama meiser sheni or not. Says the Gemara, where this behemoth was meiser sheni. How do you have a behemoth that's meiser sheni? Behemoth doesn't grow from the ground. It's because you bought the behemoth with meiser sheni money. So all the transfer of kedushin ended up landing on this behemoth. So you have a behemoth now that's meiser sheni, and this is the behemoth that you're shechting. So according to the chachamim that say that a sheni l'toma could make meiser sheni, a shlishi l'toma, hacha b'mayaskina, where it was technically chulin, it was a behemoth, it was a chaya, it was not kachim, but at the same time it's not ordinary chulin, it's meiser sheni. And we're going according to the chachamim that holds that a sheni can be oisa meiser sheni shlishi, with like Rav Meir who said mefurish that a sheni kol atom bias ma'im edivei soifrim, which by definition is a sheni l'toma, is muter bechulin ube meiser. Says the Gemara of Rav Shimi Barashi mimai. How do you know that? We're assuming that this machlokes remain the chachamim in the brayso regarding a sheni l'toma. The last words. What were the words? Umuter bechulin ubemaiser divrei Rameir v'chachamim moiser. We're assuming what it means is, could it be metama or could it not be metama? Rav Shimi Barashi said, I don't think that's pshat in the machlokes. I think pasha pshat in the Mishnah. That's not what it means. Rather, at kan lo pligi rabbanu led Rameir elo b'achilas maiser. It's a different question. The question: if somebody's tameh, he's a sheni l'toma, is he allowed to eat maiser or not? Avo benegia de maiser, but as it relates to touching maiser, v'achila de chulin or eating chulin, loy pligi. And in our Mishnah, you see there's an issue with touching it. How do you know? It said the question is necholin. It doesn't say oichlin. It says necholin. It sounds like, could you touch it? Could you even feed it to somebody else? And still you see in our Mishnah, it's going to be an issue. In other words, Rav Shimi Barashi said, I don't think that machlokes remain the chum is a tzut to our Mishnah. Because our Mishnah is discussing touching the animal with hands that are tameh, touching it to eat it for yourself or touching it to feed it to somebody else. Necholin. Not can I eat it, but can it be eaten? What does it have to do with me? Meaning, can I feed it to somebody? Can I give it to somebody else? That seems to be the question. Maybe the machlokes remain in the chachamim regarding the sheni l'tum is not whether or not I can touch it. Maybe everybody agrees I can touch it. Maybe the shaila is whether or not I'm allowed to eat it. And Rashi says the lashon of the Mishnah, if you look back at it, is very mashma that way. What did the Mishnah say? Kol aton bias mayin midivrei soifrim metame as hakodesh upoisel as hatruma umuter. When you think of Tumah V'Tayr, you don't talk in terms of Mutter Aser. You talk about if I touched it, did it become Tumah? I'm not allowed to be Metama Chulin. And that Mutter Aser sounds like, can I eat it? But the question over there is with regards to being allowed to eat it or not. And there's a Shittas Chachamim that says that a Sheni L'Tumah is not allowed to eat Ma'aseh Sheni. But no one ever said that if a Sheni L'Tumah touches Ma'aseh Sheni, that it's necessarily going to become Tameh, Amarab, El Amarab, Papa said, you're right, that's not what the Mishnah is talking about. Again, we have a Mishnah that says that somebody's shechting an animal, he shechts it with hands that are tameh. If dam came out,
then the basar becomes mukhshal kabel tuma. You can't eat it with hands that are tummy. If dam didn't come out, then you could eat. So obviously there's a concern over that this shaychin may be betam. The Gemara's kasha is that we assume we're discussing chulin, and if we're discussing chulin, then a sheni is anyways not oisa shlishi when it comes to chulin. So what's the whole tumah shayl over here? This person has hands that are tummy. Stam yadayim ashniyas l'tumah. So what's the issue? So the Gemara says, number one, how do you know we're talking about chulin? We're about 4 rayas. So the first teretz that the Gemara gave was that maybe we don't mean regular chulin. Maybe what we're talking about is ma'isa sheni, but that the Gemara knocked out. You're right. We're dealing with chulin, and we're dealing with a person's hands that are tamei, and it's true ordinarily a person's hands that are tamei are a sheni l'tumah, and a sheni is not oisa shlishi when it comes to chulin. But there is a hichatimtza where you can have hands that are tamei, and it's a rishon l'tumah. For Chulin alazi, and it's going to Rishon l'tumah. Time you go into the Brayso, any time tchilas l'chulin. It's never possible to have hands that are going to be a rishon l'tumah. No, it's possible to have hands that are going to be a rishon l'tumah for chulin. V'shniyos l'tumah. And they're going to be a sheni l'truma. Feit the Gemara, that doesn't make sense. Tchilos l'chulin in l'truma loy. How could it be more chamer for chulin than it is for truma? Hachi kamer. Tchilos af l'chulin. Its hands could sometimes be viewed as a rishon l'truma even for chulin. Shnias l'trula in l'chulin loy. But the bottom line is that we're going according to Rav Shimon Elazar, who said in a brayso that you can have your daim that are a rishon l'truma. Our Mishnah's talking about hacha b'maya skina, where the hands were a rishon, meaning that it's a rishon, it'd be oisa chulon. Sheni says, where do we have a makar for this? What is the case? What's the hechetimtza? We have yadayim that's a rishon. Thomas the Gemara said, "Tiny went to the Brayso hichnes yada lebeis hamenuga." We know that if somebody walks into a house that's a beis hamenuga that has a nega, he becomes tamei. But midday raisa, you only become tamei if your entire guf enters the house. But if only part of you enters the house, it's really a sugya masechtes vachim, be a b'miktzah shma be, or be a b'miktzah loy shma be. But the halach is that midday raisa you're definitely not tamei. So this Brayso is discussing where somebody entered a beis hamenuga with his hands. So the halach is yadav tchila is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says his hands become a rishon l'tamei. His hands become a sheni l'tamei. The Kuli Yama says everybody holds so it's not really considered that he went in. And it's only midrabanan because the Chum made a gzera. We want your hands to become tummy if they enter a beis hamenuga. Gzera atu. What happens if your entire body enters? So what's the machlokes? Rabbi Akiva said that now the Chacham went yishmak machlokes and said that the hands should be tummy. The gather of the Durabanan was, let's view the hands as if it's the entire guf. And just like if the entire guf would enter, the guf would become a rishon l'toma. So too, if the hands go in, the hands are also going to be a rishon l'toma. Umar Savar and the Chachamim that argue with Rabbi Akiva hold Yadayim Kiyadayim Da'alma. It's true the Chachamim wanted the Yadayim to become Tamim Midrabanan. Gzeira Atu if your entire guf goes in. But what kind of Tumah did they give it? They gave it the Tumah that all Yadayim has. And all Yadayim is a Sheni l'toma. So this one also is a Sheni l'toma. The bottom line is you want to know where it's possible to have your dayim that are going to be tamei and they're going to be a rishon l'toma. I just found it. It's possible if a person stuck his hands into a beis hamenuga, be a b'miktzah shloishma, be a midday raisi and atamei midday rabbanon. You are. Rabbi Akiva says that the gather of the tumah de rabbanon is ke'ein the tumah de raisa. If a person would go with his entire guf into the bnei hamenuga, he'd be a rishon l'toma. If your hands go in, it's going to be a rishon l'toma as well. Bottom line is, we had a kasha in the Mishnah. You're worried about being metama chulin. L'chura yadayim is always a sheni l'toma. Sheni is not always a shlichi l'chulin. Hacha b'mayaskina, where a person stuck his hands into a beis hamenuga. Be mixed with loishma. Be it's tamim midrabanan. Like Rabbi Akiva, what kind of tumah does it get? Like the ke'im, the tumah they rise that gets a rishon l'toma. Thus, it could be oisa chulin sheni. That's the teretz. So who is the Tana of the Mishnah? Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Feit the Gemara. If you're holding cheshbon, why does the Tana of the Mishnah have to be Reb Shimon ben Elazar? Could have said more pashut. But look, make Rabbi Akiva. Why? Let's just make Rabbi Akiva. Dama yadav tchila is saying. I mean, at the end of the day, Reb Shimon Elazar had to come on to a Rabbi Akiva. There's no Reb Shimon Elazar without Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva essentially said the same thing Reb Shimon Elazar said. He said that it's possible to have yadayim that are rishon l'toma. So why are we saying the Mishnah is Reb Shimon Elazar and he's going like Rabbi Akiva? Let the Mishnah be Rabbi Akiva. No. So why is it better if the Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva and Reb Shimon Elazar? So Rashi, because everybody knows Rabbi Akiva and Shas is called Rabbi Akiva Stimta, and one of the reasons he's called Rabbi Akiva Stimta is because Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir Rabbi Akiva. It all traces Stam Mishnah, the source to our Mishnayos that we have, the source of Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi. Alles kommt mitayras is Rabbi Akiva. Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva. So if you have Rabbi Akiva, it makes much more sense to say that we're going to Rabbi Akiva instead of saying that it's going according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why we didn't start to Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Akiva, there would have been makom to say, Dilma ki kamar Rabbi Akiva hanimi lebetshuma v'kachim dechamiri. True, Rabbi Akiva said there's a concept of Yadayim getting a rishon l'toma, but maybe only with regards to truma and kachim. Aval chulin shniyas hagen. Meaning if hands that entered the Beis Hamanuga would touch Truma, it would make the Truma a Sheni, which would allow that Truma to make more Truma a Shlishi, which would allow now to make Kachim a Revi. But it's only in the context of Truma and Kachim that we look at the hands as a Rishon. Maybe as it relates to Chulin, not. Aval Chulin Shniyas Havyan. But from Shimon Elazar, you see, not that way. He holds that it's possible to have Yodayim Tchilois. What was Reb Shimon Elazar's Lashon? Reb Shimon Elazar, Omer Mishum Rab Meir, Yodayim Tchilois LeChulin. He said Mefurish that it works for Chulin. So Shimon Elazar works in our Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva, we're not sure. Because Dilma Ki Kamer Rabbi Akiva, Hani Mili B'Truma V'Kachim, but as it relates to Chulin, maybe not. But the Gemara says, I think the Tana of the Mishnah could still be Rabbi Akiva. You know what? Because of a whole nother Rabbi Akiva. The whole question was predicated on a fact that we know that a Sheni is not Oysa Shlishi L'Chulin. It just so happens not everybody agrees with that fact. There's one Tana who doesn't hold that way. You know what that Tana is? It's none other than Rabbi Akiva. The time we learned to the Mishnah, and this is a Mishnah that's brought down in Masechta Soita. Rabbi Akiva. Which day? The day that Rabbi Elazar and Azariah became Nasi, Nisrab Asaf Solin, Toichei Gebare, Brachas Daf Chavches, that day. So Bayim Darish Rabbi Akiva, B'chol Kli Cheres, any Kli Cheres, where's the pasuk? Asher Yipo Mehem El Toichei, Kol Asher B'Soicha Yitma, V'Oisais Shpeiros. So Kli Cheres has a very special ability to be Matama. What's the halacha? That anything that falls into the circumference, even if it's only in the aver of the Kli Cheres, if there's a sheretz, for example, of the klicheres, the sheretz is matama what's inside. Additionally, if you have something sitting in the klicheres, and now a sheretz falls into the aver of the klicheres, it could be matama as well. The Gemara discussed this pasuk in very great detail in Zvachim Daf Gimel. Either way, so says the Gemara, Rabbi Kiva Darshan in this pasuk, it's kol klicheres asher yipa mehem el toichai, kol asher b'soichai yitma. And Rabbi Kiva was bothered. Grammar. It shouldn't have said kol asher b'soichai yitma. It should have said kol asher b'soichai tameh. Said Rabbi Akiva, tameh loy nemel yitma. The Tami Acherim, a tremendous chiddush, limit. You know, we learn from here that if a piece of bread falls into a klicheres, where there's a sheretz, limit al kikar sheni, shu oisa shlishi b'chulin. That kikar not only is a tummy but yitma, it could be matama. What could it be matama? Everything. It could even be matama chulin. In other words, even though the kikar is a sheni latoma, the kikar fell into the klicheres where there was a sheretz, so the kikar became tummy from the klicheres. Right? The klicheres is the rishon. It was matama the kikar. The kikar is a sheni, and kol hashem b'soichei not tami b'yitma. You see that the kikar could be matama, everything, even chulin. So said Rabbi Akiva, boy b'yayim darish Rabbi Akiva, that a sheni is like a shlishi l'chulin. So again, so what's the whole issue over here? Why don't we just say the time of the Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva? It's true, you have a Mishnah that's sheni is like a shlishi, but Rabbi Kiva Shita is that a sheni could be Yisr Shlishi. The Gemara says, even though it's true, Rabbi Kiva holds that a sheni is Yisr Shlishi, that's only with regards to Tumah Deiraisa. But maybe as it relates to Tumah Derabbanan, not our Mishnah is discussing Yodayim Nesua voice, with the hands with Tumah. Stam Yodayim is only a sheni l'Tumah B'Derabbanan. Maybe by a sheni l'Tumah B'Derabbanan, you don't have this halacha Excel. So just before we end, in the spirit of a hashtag Sunday style daf, just to conclude today's daf, Me'ain, the first part of the daf, with a kasha from the Minchas Chinuch. Just the kasha. The punchline is the kasha. The Minchas Chinuch prefaces this question with the following akdama. He says, "Ve'echtev l'cha kushya nifla tehilo lekel yisbarach." So he's giving shvach v'yidah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the kasha. Now, usually a kasha is a problem. You don't want a kasha. But this kasha is the punchline. So either way, so what's Minchas Chinuch's kasha? It's in Moisech HaShabbos. It's a mitzvah lamid beis. At the end, after he goes through the Lamed Tes Malachis, it's Ois Beis, page Kuf Ayin Ches, in the Numen Ches Chinuchs. We had a Mishnah in Masechtas Chulin, Daf Yud, it's a cheshbon. We had a Mishnah in Masechtas Chulin, Daf Yud Aleph Manaf. The Mishnah said, "Hashoichet b'Shabbos, afal pisha mischayev ben nafshoy, shchitas eksher." If somebody shechs on Shabbos, even b'mezeh, even though he's chayev misa, the halacha is his shchita is going to be kosher. Tais asks a kasha that why is the shchita kosher? Why isn't he a mumah l'chal Shabbos? And a mumah l'chal Shabbos has a din of a guy. So Tais says that the only time a mumah l'chal Shabbos has a din of a guy is if he's mumah l'chal Shabbos b'far hesya. Maybe he's talking about where he didn't do it b'far hesya. Tais says another teretz that maybe he only becomes a mummer after the first shchita, but for the first shchita itself, not. The Tzayich tells us too, in Simon and Beis, we spoke out this raid when we learned the Gemara and Daf Yud Aleph Manal. But the truth is another very, very important kasha that we didn't speak out on the time, and that is the Marit's kasha. Marit asks a kasha that we know there's machlekes Abaye v'Rava in the beginning of Masechtas Tmura. Kol milsa da'avid rachmana lo'isavit. I avid mahani or I avid loy mahani. Abaye says that if a person does something that the Torah said he's not supposed to do, it doesn't have any impact on the chalois. The effect goes into effect regardless. Rava says no. Kol milsa da'amar rachmana loy savid. The halacha is I avid loy mahani. If you do something that the Torah told you not to do, the halacha is that if you do it, loy mahani. So freik the marita kasha hashoichet b'Shabbos. He violated one of the lamites malachas. If he violated one of the lamites malachas, l'chayra, he was over a milsa da'amar rachmana loy savid. We paskin like Rav. This is not one of the Yalkagams. We paskin kol milsa da'amar rachmana loy savid yavid loy mahani. If that's the case, why shchitas ksheira? Why don't you say kol milsa da'avid rachmana loy savid yavid loy mahani? A gevaldige kasha. Said the Marit a very important insight. The only time you say kol milsa da'avid rachmana loy savid yavid loy mahani, that's only if by saying loy mahani you're going to accomplish something. The purpose of saying loy mahani is if the isser is contingent on the chalois, so then you'll say, if the chalois never went into effect anyways, so it comes out you didn't do the isser. So to fadin the isser, there's a klal of kol milsa da'avid rachmana loy savid yavid loy mahani. But if benkach the aveira will have been done, and you're not accomplishing anything by saying yavid loy mahani, there the halacha is yavid mahani. So said the Marit, what's the isser of sheikhah b'Shabbos? Netilas neshama, you killed an animal. Whether the shechita's kosher, the shechita's pasul, the animal's dead. Regardless, you did the netilas neshama, which means that saying yavid loy mahani is not going to fadin anything as far as the isser goes. If that's the case, you don't have the klal yavid loy mahani. But says the Marit, you're going to tell me it's not posh? Why? Because everybody knows that mekalkel b'Shabbos is potter. The only time you chayiv for doing malacha on Shabbos is if you're masakin when you do the malacha. But if you're mekalkel on Shabbos, you're potter. So time of the Marit, very geschmack. If the shechita's kosher, so then you were masakin when you did the ma'aser shechita. But if the shechita is pasul, you're going to be left with an avela. If you're going to be left with an avela, you're a mekalkel. Mekalkel b'Shabbos is potter. So let's say yavid loy mahani, so that you'll have now a mekalkel. If you're mekalkel, you just fadin the malacha Shabbos because the mekalkel b'Shabbos is potter. But says Marit, it's a tais. Because although it's true that a yid is only allowed to eat from an animal if it has a kosher shechita, but a guy is not allowed to eat from a live animal, but he's allowed to eat from a dead animal, afilu b'nechir ba'alma. Even if he didn't have a kosher shechita. If that's the case, even a shechita psula, a shechita that's an avela, is still a maisa mesakin, because it's mesakin the animal for the benoyach. Because the benoyach previously was not allowed to eat it because it was evim ben achai. Now it's not evim ben achai anymore. So says the Marit, hafla v'fela. That's why there's no yavid loy mahani. You're right. Technically, ashaychet b'Shabbos, you should say kol milsa da'avid rachmana loy savid yavid loy mahani. But the heck to me, you say that the only time you say yavid loy mahani is if you're going to accomplish something by saying it. But if the isser is going to be done regardless, it's not. Then there's no reason to say yavid loy mahani. Here the isser is netilas neshama, and whether the shechita was kosher, the shechita wasn't kosher, you killed the animal. You'll tell me no, because if the shechita is kosher, you were mesakin. If the shechita is pasul, you were mekalkel. It's not true, because even if the shechita is pasul, you were still mesakin. You were mesakin for a benoyach. Till now it was evim ben achai. Now it's not evim ben achai anymore. Either way, says the Minchas Chinuch that the hadvarim mefursamim ayin shar melech perakimel migerish and Allah yotes hu vo dvarav b'chibur zeh kama pa'amim. These are the words of the Marit. Stating that, says the Minchas Chinuch, I heard a kasha nifla. And with one hakdam, one little bit of leap of faith that you have to take. Not such a chiddush, but there's just one assumption that you have to make. Says the Minchas Chinuch, that's pasha to me. That what would be if a person did an isser, and by saying yavid loy mahani, we can't fardin, we can't correct the entire isser, but we can correct a little bit of the isser. Would that be enough to say yavid loy mahani? Says the Minchas Chinuch, I believe yes. Meaning, as long as we can fadin a little bit of the isser, I think that would be enough for us to say that loy mahani. Because loy mahani is said anytime we can accomplish something, and even if I can't accomplish saving the entire Avera, but if I can save part of the Avera, I think that would be enough. If that's the case, that's Minchas Chinuch, based on today's daf, Chulin daf lamed gimel amud aleph, I'm going to ask you a bomba kasha. And that is, we know the halacha of Riba b'Sheyura. Riba b'Sheyura is a sugya in Mesechtes, Menachis. The Gemara over there discusses a case where there was a chayla sheyesh by sakana. And the doctor said that we need to give this person grapes. The problem was there were no grapes. There was a tree, there were two branches. This chayla needed 2 grapes. grapes. One branch has 2 grapes, the other branch has 3 grapes. So what's the halacha? You cut the branch that has 2 grapes. Why? Because here you're cutting less grapes. Now you're going to tell me what's the difference. At the end of the day, it's 1 ma'aseh k'tzira. It's true, it's only 1 ma'aseh k'tzira, but there's a concept of ribui b'shiyura, that you want to be mema'it in the shir as much as possible. Meaning, if 2 people are over the same chil Shabbos, but one person had a bigger shir than the other, the one that had a bigger shir did more of an aveira. There was more echos, speaking qualitatively, chil Shabbos. That's halacha ribui b'shiyura. Most Rishonim hold ribui b'shiyura is the Rabbana. But there's a shita Haran. The Ran shita is that ribui b'shiyura is the Iraisa. Says the Mechas Chinuch, let's talk about a chulin case. What would be if there's a chayil sheish b'sakon and it's Shabbos, and the doctor said we have to shecht for this person. There's no bus in the veil. Right, we have to shecht for this person. And there's 2 animals. There's a big, gross animal, and then there's a behemoth daka. There's a smaller animal. Says the Mechas Chinuch, it's pasha like the Ran. Midai Raisa, you'd be obligated to shecht the smaller animal. Because it's riba b'shiyura. Why go ahead and shecht the bigger animal where you're being marbin the shear? It's better to go ahead and shecht the smaller animal. If that's the case, says the Mechas Chinuch, in today's daf, we saw an unbelievable idea. We saw that the halacha is that every single time you shecht an animal, there's a question: could a ben noyach eat from the bnei me'ayim, or could the ben noyach not eat from the bnei me'ayim? What's the shaila? The shaila is because as soon as you sever the kana and the veshet, anything attached to the kana and the veshet, the mancha b'dekula damya. It's as if they're not in the body of the animal anymore. The problem is the animal's still alive. The animal is still mefar cheses. In other words, it's technically even menachat. For you, it's not an issue, because as long as there's a shechita, it could be alive and well. A ben pekua you're allowed to eat without a shechita, because despite the fact that it's allowed without, because it had the shechita in the mother, because there was a ma'aseh shechita. But a guy, the ben achir talia milsa, it's not telling you shechita, it's going to be an issue. Stating that, the Gemara said it's not that way. Rav Papa said he heard, he wanted to ask the kasha, he didn't ask it, but it turned out Rav Papa was right. Why? Because Yisrael shari b'nayach aser, meaning even though in theory the bnei me'ayim of an animal was always Evim and Achai, still a guy is allowed to eat the bnei me'ayim. Because if he is allowed to eat the bnei me'ayim, a guy is allowed to eat the bnei me'ayim. Stating that the Tvuashar and the Tashbitz and the Pritaya, as brought down in the Pischei Tshuva and Simon Chav Zayin, there's a whole Tshuva from the Chassam Sofer, by the way, on this thing the other day, Simon Yotes, where the Achrayim discuss with the Shayil and a Kontris, and they discuss that that's only going to be true if it's the behemoth as a shchuta, because then it's mutter to the yitz and mela has to be mutter to the guy because of miyah kamidi. But what happens if the behemoth is an avela? Over there you're not going to have this halacha. Over there you're not going to have the miyah kamidi. If that's the case, it's going to be aser. If that's the case, it's going to be aser for the guy to eat it. That's the case, says the Minchas Chinuch. Hashoichet b'Shabbos. What's the halacha? Shchitas l'ksheira. Freit the Marita Kasha. Why shchitas l'ksheira? Say Yavalei Mahani. See, because the Yavalei Mahani is not going to accomplish anything. Why? Because at the end of the day, even if you tell me the shchita is not kosher, you still kill the animal, and you were still misaking the animal. Why? Because the Benayas let eat it. He says, 1 second. I'll tell you where chapsach and afkamino. If shchitas is ksheira, that means a yid's allowed to eat from it. If a yid's allowed to eat from it, then a guy could eat from it, from the entire animal, even from the Bnei Me'ayim. If the shechit is possible, then it's going to come out that it's an avela. If it's an avela, it's true you were masakin for the guy, but there's one part of the animal you were not masakin, that you were makalkal. That's the bnei me'ayim, because the bnei me'ayim is evim and achai. The only reason the guy's allowed to eat is because the yid's allowed to eat it. But for that, you need shchitas kshera. If shchitas is psula, then it's going to be evim and achai. That means the guy won't be able to eat it. So it comes out by saying that the shchit is possible. What you're fadining is you're being memayit in the shear of how much nicer tikkun of the tilas hashama you did. If the shechita is kosher, you were masaking the entire animal. That means in the shear of netilas neshama, it's the entire animal. But if you're going to tell me that it's an avela, so it's true there was netilas neshama, and it's true you were masaking, but there's one chelik of the animal you weren't masaking. That chelik you were makalko. So let's say yovad loy mahani, not to save the entire issa. You can't save it, but you could save part of the Yisr. You could save the Riba B'Shiyura. And why shouldn't that be enough to say, Shchitas Psul? This is a kasha that really spans so many sugyas ashas. He begins the kasha, Ve'echtav l'chakushi nefla, tehila l'kel yisbarach. He concludes the kasha with Ve'hi kushi nefla. I think any terrorist is anticlimactic, so I think we'll leave it over here.